Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, we're going to jump right into one of the biggest questions a person can ask. Why are we here? Or maybe a better way to ask it is, why did God create anything in the first place? The Bible gives a surprisingly direct answer, but that simple answer really opens up a much bigger question about who God is. So, let's get right to it. Scripture's pretty clear in places like 1 Corinthians and Colossians that everything exists for God. And that means the whole universe, and you and me right along with it. But that little phrase, for God, while it can be easily misunderstood, it brings up some serious questions about what God's motives were.
Right. What does that phrase suggest? Does it mean God was missing something? Was he lonely? Was he bored? To get to the real meaning, we have to start with a core biblical idea: God's complete self-sufficiency.
And this idea of God's self-sufficiency, it changes everything. It flips a common assumption about his reasons for creating completely upside down. The Bible flat out contradicts the idea that God created because he needed something. A perfect example is when Paul is addressing the Athenians in the book of Acts. This verse shows that God is the source of all things. He's the one who gives life and breath. He doesn't need a single thing from us. In the act of creation, he is the giver, not the one receiving something. He's the benefactor, not the beneficiary. That's so true. If everything comes from him and is sustained through him, then it has to exist for him as its goal. I mean, you can't give God something that he already owns. So creating for God can't mean he was trying to fill a need. It has to be about putting his own fullness on display. Okay, so if creation is all about putting God's fullness on display, where do we fit into all this? What's humanity's specific job in this grand display? The purpose of an image is, well, it's to image. Just think about a statue of someone. Its whole point is to represent that person, to put them on display. It's the same idea. When God created us in his image, the goal was for us to put him on display through our very lives. God's original instruction to Adam and Eve was to fill the whole earth with his image bearers. The idea was for the world to be filled with the knowledge of his glory. This is the complete opposite of what happened at Babel, where the people tried to make a name for ourselves. See, we were made to make a name for God. But of course, that original plan got broken by sin. And that brokenness, it required a whole new solution. The Bible actually calls this the new creation, and it's God's answer to the fall. But here's the thing, the fall didn't derail God's plan at all. Instead, that broken first creation became the stage, the theater, really, for an even greater display of his glory. And that's the glory of his saving grace in Jesus Christ. So this means the new creation isn't just a patch-up job on the original. It's not about just trying to get back to the Garden of Eden. It's actually an upgrade. Look, in the first creation, humanity was made to reflect God in a general way. But in this new creation, believers are specifically being renewed into the image of Christ, who is the perfect image of God. The Bible even calls this a more glorious image than Adam's was. This does bring up another question, though. If the whole point is to display God's glory, and the new creation is all about Christ, then how do the glory of the Father and the glory of the Son fit together? Well, Scripture shows there's no conflict there at all. The Apostle Paul is clear that we exist for God the Father. And he also tells us that all things were created not just through Christ, but also for Christ. So you see, it's not two different goals. The glory of the Father and the Son is a single, unified glory. We see this peak in how the Bible describes worship in heaven. It starts with praise for God as the Creator. But then it builds to an even greater crescendo of praise for the Lamb who was slain, the one who ransomed people for God. This shows us that the goal of the first creation, to display God's glory, is most fully achieved in the new creation, which displays the glory of Christ saving sinners. And this leaves us with a final question we should all think about. If we are part of this new creation and we are meant to display a more glorious image, what does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives? How does reflecting Christ change the way we live for God's glory?